Again, we're in the Song of Songs, this little book that is a song written by Solomon. And on one hand, it's a small book. It's 8 chapters, 117 verses. But on the other hand, we want to enter into the thought, the spirit, the heart of the writer, not only in knowing what the words say, but also in our experience. We're writing a song. Every believer is a lover who eventually will be married to Christ. So we're writing a love song with him. And in this love song, there are so many revelations of Christ, so many experiences of Christ, so many intimate touches with Christ. Sometimes we resist him. Sometimes he draws us into something more. And we're in chapter 8, verse 10. So we've covered a lot of experience of the bride, of the lover of Christ, from when she was in a vineyard and when he was a king, and there was such a big distance between them, but now they're really one. They really are one. And this verse here, let me just read the verse, chapter 8, verse 10. It says, I am a wall, and my breasts like towers. Then was I in his eyes as one that found favor. And this is Song of Songs, chapter 8, verse 10. In verses 8 and 9, we see the mature bride, and she's with the magnificent Christ. I call him magnificent because in this book, he's just been unveiled in such a rich way. And they're together, working together. They're considering together. And they're focused on what to do with the little sister. So if you go back to verses 8 and 9, you see the little sister. She's immature. That's why she's called little. But she has her title, or her name is sister, so she's a believer. She's a lover. But yet she had no breast. That means there was no growth. So the question was asked in verse 8 and 9, what shall we do? But this is amazing. In verse 8 and 9, the personal pronoun we was used, showing that it was a matter that was both on the heart of the mature bride and also on the loving heart of Christ. So the mature bride and the magnificent Christ had the same intention for this little sister, the same desire, the same goal for this young little sister. So potentially, when they looked at her, they said she might be a wall or she might be a door. And in either case, she needed growth, she needed perfection, she needed bridal beauty, she needed bridal affections, bridal characteristics to match Christ as the bridegroom. So eventually, through growth and perfection, she would become part of the corporate bride, and this bride is to please and to delight and satisfy the bridegroom Christ. So the question, what shall we do? One consideration of what the little sister might become is a wall. And to become a wall, she must develop in sanctification. This is a continued process of the indwelling, being filled with the indwelling spirit, the transforming spirit of God. And when she becomes a wall, negatively, or anyone becomes a wall, if you become a wall in God's purpose, or I become a wall in God's purpose, we're as a barrier against every form of evil. This is a wall. That's negatively. But positively, as a wall, we stand in a way that defends the truth of God. We stand in a way that upholds the preeminence of Christ. No one can get through this wall to knock down the truth. No one can get through this wall to put Christ in a place where he isn't preeminent. So as his holy nature spreads into this little sister, she begins to bear a strong testimony. She becomes a barrier or a barricade against evil, and she begins to protect the eternal things regarding the preeminence of Christ. And surely the wall is a bridal feature. You ask, well, how could a wall be a bridal feature? Well, if you look in Revelation 21 and 22, it's the New Jerusalem. It's called the Holy City. And it lists the different components of this city. And one remarkable thing is that this city is called the Lamb's wife. It's the city is the bride, is Christ's bride. And one of the components of the city, one of the features of the city is the wall. So the bridal city has a wall. So as the little sister here in the song develops into the wall, she takes on the bridal characteristics of the eternal city, which is the Lamb's bride and wife. So while in the previous two verses, I'm still in verses 8 and 9, sorry, we'll get to verse 10, the pronoun we is used 4 times to emphasize that there was such a union between the bride and the beloved Christ, and this union was in service, this union was in their intention, union was in desire and goal. Now in verse 10, the bride begins to speak. She begins to speak alone. And so she uses the personal pronoun I 2 times. She declares, I am a wall, and my breasts like towers. Then was I in his eyes as one that found favor. So she takes up the imagery of the wall again, used in the previous verse for the potential of the little sister, and now she uses the wall to describe herself. So now in this verse 10, it seems like the little sister disappears from view. The burden for her hasn't disappeared, but personally, she's disappeared from view as she's incorporated into the thought, of the one corporate bride. But there's some that would say, oh, this in verse 10 is the little sister making a protest. You call me little sister, you say, and so she's protesting of her little stature. But if you read this verse and you compare it with the verses 8 and 9, surely it's the mature bride that is here speaking, in contrast with the little sister who has no breasts. In verse 10, the bride speaks, or you could maybe even say she interrupts with a personal testimony. And this testimony is of her purity, and this testimony is she's of the age to marry. She's really conscious of being loved by Christ, because it says in this verse, it says, in his eyes. The bride speaks with such confident love that is so wonderful. We need to have this confidence when we speak of Christ. We need to be so bold. Her testimony is of truth. It's not she's hoping or it's truth, and it's springing from a conscience that doesn't have any accusation, any failure. It's like in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and Paul describes himself. He says, I know nothing against myself. He that judges me is the Lord. So she's just testifying. There's nothing. I'm not saying anything here that is out of the ordinary or trying to make something more than it is. No, the bride describes herself in an unadulterated and in pure happiness, which at last she's reached this kind of stature with Christ. She's proud of the bridal city because she declares she's a wall, and she matches Christ. She matches. She's the Lamb's bride. She's the Lamb's wife. So when speaking of the little sister, if you go back to verses 8 and 9, when you speak of the little sister, there's a word used, and it's the word if. If is used 2 times. So there's an uncertainty of an outcome of what's going to happen with the little sister. The little sister's condition of growth and perfection still needs to be seen. It still needs to be conformed. You can't say she is this when she's not. So they use the word if. But in verse 10, when the mature bride speaks, she doesn't use the word if I be a wall. With the little sister, if she be a wall. But not with the bride. She declares boldly, I am a wall. She speaks without hesitation. She speaks without doubt. Not if I be a wall. For her condition, and perfection is just evident. She's manifested actually as a wall. She's grateful for the divine architect, which is just the bridegroom Christ, to what he has done for her and what she has become to him. And this is just a simple statement of what she is now. In the eyes of the beloved Christ, she's one who has found favor in his eyes. So she uses the word I am. There's no if I am, if I will be, if. No, I am. She's just conscious that she's found favor in the eyes of the beloved. As in 1 Corinthians 15:10, Paul declares, I am what I am by the grace of God. His grace to and in this bride has not been in vain, but produced one who matches and satisfies Christ. And this is what's happening with us. Day by day, as we open to him, we start the day with him, grace comes to us, and it begins to work in us. It begins to eliminate the old things and begins to deposit more of Christ into us. We're saved by grace. This saving grace wasn't just a one-time saving to bring us from hell to the new Jerusalem. No, it's a day-by-day saving that is producing in us something that matches Christ, something that satisfies Christ. Actually, it's something that will be part of the holy city known as the bride and the wife of the Lamb. So she says, I am. And if you look at different translations, it's been translated in actually three different ways. It could be either I am, or it could be I have become, or it could be I have been. So the mature bride's testimony is either of her present existence or of her progress that has taken her up to this point, or a declaration that she has been in this condition or this state for some time already. She's just giving a testimony of it. So each of us, you, me, as lovers of Christ, we really love Christ, need to testify of who we are, what we have become, and what we have been due to his love. So in the light of the Lord's presence, we can be sure of who we are, of what we become, or what we have been. One day at the judgment seat of Christ, a solemn, sober moment at the judgment seat of Christ, it will be manifest. We won't be able to fool anyone. We won't be able to fool ourselves. But at the judgment seat of Christ, it will be shown whether we really have bridal beauty, bridal affections, bridal characteristics that match Christ, our bridegroom. And when he comes at that time, will we be ready to enter with him into the marriage feast of the Lamb? So she says, I am. And then she says, in his eyes. You know, many times we appreciate when others honor us or flatter us, and then we take, but it might not be true. It might be, it might not be true. But all that matters is what we are, what we become, and what we have been in his eyes. It's only his eyes. And we look to that day when we see him and he sees us, that he would say, well done. When others say well done, we appreciate it, but it's not the well done we want to hear. The well done we want to hear is coming from the lips of our beloved Christ. So we need to really live in his presence to know where we stand before him in growth and perfection. Only his presence will reveal where we're really at. So we don't think more highly of ourselves, or we won't think lowly of ourselves. But it's like, again, in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul says in verse 3, he says, as for me, it matters very little of how one ought to think. if others think about him, if I be evaluated by you. As for me, it matters very little how you evaluate me. That's not my final declaration. My conscience is clear, Paul says, that doesn't prove I'm right either. So it's not how others evaluate us. It's not even how our conscience evaluates us. It's the Lord himself who examines us and decides. So many times we feel about ourselves in a wrong way. We might even feel, well, I'm really progressing. I'm ahead of all these brothers and sisters. Look at me. Or we might say, I'm terrible. I'm nothing. But the real condition of how we are is in the Lord's presence. It's in his eyes. So don't get down on yourself on one hand, and don't get too high of yourself on the other, but just be in the Lord's presence and say, Lord, I want a life that pleases you, that satisfies you. I want my life to have bridal beauty to match you. I want my life to have bridal affections. I don't want to love the world. I only want my affections for you. And I want to have bridal characteristics. You're holy, I want to be holy. You're righteous, I want righteousness. And this all comes from him. Excuse me. This all comes from him dispensing his life into us. Our beloved desires to have a bride to match him. One day when he sees the bride, it'll be just like when Adam first saw Eve. She wasn't called Eve, she was the woman, the rib taken out of him. He goes, this is it. He finally found his match. So, excuse me. So may we grow. May we be perfected, that we can become the bride that he delights in. You know, we look at salvation of what I'm getting out of it, but there's a part that he desires, his counterpart. So as believers in Christ, we all start out like the little sister, a young one. We don't know much, we have nothing, but we're born again, and there's a love in us that's burning for him. We lack supply, we lack growth, we lack vision, we lack perfection. We're short in so many ways before the Lord, but through these 8 chapters of the song, there's one who has matured, one who has become the delight of the bridegroom. We see one who matches the beloved bridegroom, one who knows his heart, reflects his beauty. She's full of bridal affection. She displays his characteristics. When you look at her, you see the reflection of Christ. It's like in 2 Corinthians 3:18. We behold him and we reflect him like a mirror. So one who is his bride, his wife, is seen in this beloved lover of Christ. So now may we, as believers in Christ, as lovers of Christ, write this song into our life. You go back to chapter 1, word by word, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, until we become his mature bride for his satisfaction. Every verse of the song needs to become ours, that we can become the delight of Christ.